You ever lost someone close to you in your adult life? I want you to think back to that time. What were your initial feelings that moment that you found out? How did you process what was happening? Did you talk to someone in that initial moment? What were those first feelings? Were they anger, fear? Did it feel like you were in a cloud? How did you process what was happening? Did you talk to someone right away? Did you cry or get mad? Did you pray? In the early days of your loss, did you lean on anyone else? Was it better for you to write it down or spend more time alone? Or did you prefer talking with lots of people and that would make you feel better? Did you start to question why that person had to die? Did you wonder what each day would look like now without them? Did you seek help? If so, how? Did you reach out and ask for it? Was it offered to you? Did you take time off from work? Or did working help you feel better and maybe you worked more? After your loved one died, did you attend a ceremony or was there no ceremony offered? Did you do something private and ceremonial for yourself? What did you do in the moments when you felt incredibly alone in your grief? What were some of those feelings you had? What did you do with them as they would wave in and wave out over those days and weeks and months after you lost your loved one? Now I want you to imagine that you are 4 years old and there are tall adults walking and talking all around you. And you keep hearing words that don't go together and do not make sense. All you know is your mom is gone. But where has she gone? When is she coming back? The adults are talking around you and above you and saying things like passed away and gone to a better place, none of which these abstract thoughts make any sense to your 4-year-old mind. You wonder if you should have picked up your toys and then maybe she would come back. Or maybe she's just in a different building. What does it mean when the adults say they are sorry and sad for you? Who's going to make my dinner tonight? Who will read me a story? And what if I need a Band-Aid? Does this mean that my dad is going to leave too? And where are they going when they leave? Now you're 15 and you're sitting in a living room with adults talking all around you, and you're feeling rage building up inside of you as they walk past you and say things as if this is some easy thing that's happening. Or they're crying all around you, which just frustrates you. They're still not aware of what your needs are. You're the one who lost your mom. No one is feeling that intensity to the level of you that you are. Now you start thinking about all of those last things you said and how rude you were to her last Tuesday. And you can't seem to get past the pain in your stomach that makes you feel nauseous. Studies that have been done on children and grief teach us a few very important things. We know that children display different symptoms that may not be recognized as grief related. There are so many recognizable adult grief responses that we as adults understand as standard responses. But for children, it will depend on their temperament, their age at the time of loss, their personality, and who they lost, in how those symptoms will show. Some children will use this time to bottle up and become quiet. Some will look almost as if they're happier than before the person they lost because they'll be dancing and singing and playing. Some children will process their loss and cope by overachieving, by working harder than they ever have before. Each stage of a child's experiences loss differently, depending on where they are in their development. Grief may not display as sadness for every child. A child may look as if nothing has changed for them. They cannot experience intense pain for long, extended periods of time. This often leads to adults assuming that the child may not even be struggling. It's very common for parents and those who are caregiving a child who has lost an important person in their life to come to a support person and say, I just don't think they're grieving. It just doesn't look like they're grieving. Children are not able to share or even understand what or how their grief is at some stages. It's very important to not assume that they are okay based on how they look on the outside. One complication of being the main caregiver of a child who is grieving is that many times you, the adult, are also grieving that same loss at the same time. As the adult that is caring for the child, you may be weighted down heavily with your own grief. And this is very important to recognize, and also very important to seek support for. It can be particularly difficult to help your child with their grief as you are concurrently dealing with yours. You should reach out for support for yourself and for your child. And remember that it is not just your job to help them process their grief, just as you do not need to process your grief alone also. In 2016, Koblenz finished a study on the qualitative experiences of parental loss for children. It was found that for a child, the death of a parent is a calamitous and life-defining circumstance. We know also that loss is a traumatic experience for a child. The complication and one of the largest differences between child grief and adult grief is that children are processing through their grief and concurrently working on their main job of development. Let's talk some numbers, mainly so that you can understand as the caregiver of a grieving child that you are not alone, nor is your child in their grief. Many are not aware of how many children face loss. 1 in 5 children before the age of 18 will lose someone close to them. Koblenz also found that parental death has left 2.5 million children in single-parent households. A study done in 2001 by Harris and Harrington found that 77.6% of the 1,746 children ages 11 to 16 that they studied had lost at least one relative or close friend. We have already talked about how it can feel to be a child that is grieving. Now, I want to touch on why it is so important that we support children who are grieving. There is a wonder of what is going to happen to them now that sits deeply in most ages of children after loss. Children who experience the loss of a parent can have lifelong impacts if untreated or unsupported. There can be feelings of isolation and guilt, fault for the loss of their loved one, confusion behind how and when, difficulty coping through the process, and a lot of fear. Great detriment is done to a child when they experience a loss. Following a loss, it is common for children to feel isolated and wonder who will fill the role of the person that was lost. In 2011, Crawford explained through their study that children ages 7 to 11 or 12 can blame themselves and feel at fault for their parents' death. Now let's talk about what you may see in the child that you are supporting that is grieving, because we know that some of these things may show, but as we talked about earlier, they may also not look like to you that they are grieving. But some of the more common issues that come up with children are problems with sleep and eating are found with all ages of children who are grieving. A child's overall ability to cope with their emotions may be affected. This may come out in many ways, acting in ways that don't seem like their normal self, or being easily upset, or being overly comfortable or uncomfortable compared to the child that you recognized before. Negative school performance has also been found in grieving children. In a study done by Hillard in 2007, a lot of times the school performance may just be a shift that you see or that a teacher brings up, that they don't quote unquote seem themselves or are not as interested in what they have been studying that they used to be. Although these are some of the things you may see, they're not limited to just these. A study done in 2002 found that children are commonly treated with adult models of grief support that are not appropriate for their level of understanding. This may be done by well-meaning adults who are trying to support the child with what they know an adult would normally need. Unfortunately, we know kids are not mini adults. Every child is at a different stage of development, and each of those stages is going to bring a different experience with loss. A child's developmental stage greatly affects his or her response and perception of grief and how they will process through this. I know as a caregiver of children that one thing we very commonly do is go to our medical doctor or pediatrician to help understand what our child needs, which is a very good thing to do. In particular with grief, sometimes it ends up not being the best place to go. In a study done in 2007 by Breen and O'Connor, it was found that a medicalization of grief occurs often and does not allow for acceptance of alternative treatments that may be more helpful for children. We're going to touch on some of these available alternative treatments that we know can very much help children process through grief. One of the treatments that we know are beneficial for children in many aspects through grief, through development, is play. Children's main job of development can happen so well through play. Torbeck found in 2001 that often play therapies can be ignored with grieving children. It is common for adults to misunderstand or to give value to the importance of play for a child that is grieving. It's common for us as adults to think that discussing the issue with a child and asking them questions about their grief would be a great way to support them because it is a way in which adults work through their problems. But children's language is more through play and can give them a safe place and a healing place to process their grief. We discussed earlier that it is common for children who experience the loss of a parent or caregiver to be affected by the lack of appropriate age grief support. A child is physically, emotionally, socially, cognitively, and morally finding their way and developing each day. It is important that us adults show up for them because without that, they are most likely not going to have the ability to know how to help themselves in all of these realms as they process through their grief. We have heard a lot more in the recent years of the importance of one's mental health. Loss affects our mental health. 50% of those who experience a death become depressed in the year following the death. We also know that children who are grieving are prone to anxiety and depression. It is important to address these needs early, to address the needs soon after the loss and continue to check in with a child in the time period after a loss up to a few years. Currently, there are few treatments available for children who may experience prolonged grief disorder. It is important that we make note and support the child with the appropriate mental health support soon and continuously after the loss of their loved one. Torbeck found in 2011 that it is known that grief affects all domains of a child's life and unaddressed can lead to many other issues. Grief can interrupt a child's normal development. Grief can also affect many aspects of a child's life and unaddressed can lead to other issues. Children can regress in their already acquired skills. The development impact, complications, and regression are things that can become long-term effects for a child that is unsupported and untreated throughout their grief process. Thinking about a child grieving is a heavy thought. Thinking about being the caregiver of that child is a lot to carry. Let's talk about what we know works. Grief camps have been proven as effective for many children to help them process and work through grief. A study done by Clute and Kaibashi in 2013 gave us some very good information on the effects of these grief camps. You can find those in many different forms. Play therapy, as we talked about the power of play earlier, play therapy in many forms is one of the best therapies for children and is not commonly utilized with children grieving. Children who experience music therapy were shown to have positive behavioral changes and relief of their grief symptoms by a study done by Hillard in 2007. All of these therapies are designed for children and take into account their age and their abilities to understand their world. They are designed for and specifically for children at each developmental stage. We have talked about what can happen, what doesn't work, what can help. Now let's give you those tools that you need specifically in our area. There are two great programs that are offered with no fee for some of their basic services and also offer fee services. We talked about camps. Stepping Stones of Hope is located on 7th Street in downtown Phoenix and provides camps for children and their families in Maricopa County. Here we have their phone number and website listed so that you can contact them for more detailed information. Their camps are day and extended stay. Another opportunity to find support for your grieving child is the New Song Center for Grieving Children that is run under Hospice of the Valley. It is specifically grief groups for children and their families, children ages 5 through 18, and the adults that are grieving also. Their phone number and website information are listed here for you to contact and receive more information regarding their program availability. Now take yourself back to that 4-year-old child. Now imagine the adult that kneels down to your level and looks in your eyes and tells you in words that you can understand what has happened and what is happening. I know this all feels strange and doesn't make sense, but I'm here to help you. We're going to figure this out together with the help of some really special people. I want you to share with me if you are worried or mad, scared or happy. You will be feeling a lot of things, and they are all okay to feel. We're going to do this together. Loss is hard for even a grown-up. Let's not let any child grieve alone or without support. And more importantly, as the caregiver of that child, know that you are not alone and do not bear the weight on your own of trying to help your child process their grief alongside when you may also be. Let's show up for those kids that are experiencing a major life event, a major life-changing process that we know even as an adult can be so very difficult. Thank you so much for listening today, and please let me know if you have any questions or if I can be of help to help you understand any of the other things we've discussed today.